The stage lights dimmed inside the packed theater of America's Got Talent. The audience buzzed with chatter, eagerly waiting for the next act to appear. The iconic theme music faded, and the announcer's voice boomed across the auditorium. Please welcome, from Manila, Philippines, a father and son singing duo. A hush fell over the room as two figures walked timidly into the spotlight. The father, dressed in a simple button-up shirt and dark slacks, held the small hand of his son, who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. The boy's face carried a mix of nervousness and wonder as he took in the massive crowd and the towering judges' table. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every hesitant step they took. The crowd, sensing their shyness, erupted into a supportive round of applause. The boy squeezed his father's hand tighter. The father, with a reassuring smile, bent down slightly and whispered something in his son's ear. Though the microphones didn't pick it up, anyone could guess it was words of courage. "We're together. Don't be afraid." When they reached the center of the stage, the spotlight illuminated them fully. The father nodded toward the judges politely, his Filipino accent evident when he greeted them softly. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Daniel, and this is my son, Miguel. We came all the way from Manila to sing for you tonight." The audience cheered again, touched by the simplicity and sincerity in his tone. Simon Cowell leaned forward, curiosity lighting up his face. "So, Daniel and Miguel, tell us a little bit about yourselves. Why America's Got Talent? Why now?" The father cleared his throat, his voice already thick with emotion. "I work in construction back home. Life is not always easy. But no matter how hard the days are, I always sing with my son. Music is our bond. We sing at home, in the streets, even when I am tired from work. It keeps us strong, and it keeps us together." The crowd murmured, clearly moved by his honesty. Heidi Klum clasped her hands under her chin, smiling warmly. Sofia Vergara tilted her head, her eyes softening. The father continued, now glancing down at his son with pride. "Miguel has a gift, a voice that touches people. But he was afraid no one would listen. I told him, 'Son, dreams have no borders. If you have the courage to sing, the world will hear you.' And so, here we are." The boy, still clutching his father's hand, lifted the microphone closer. His small voice, timid but brave, added, "I just want to make my papa proud." The entire room melted. The crowd let out a collective "ah," and several people in the front rows could be seen wiping their eyes already. Simon smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth betraying a rare softness. "That's already enough to make us want to hear you sing," he said. "Take your time, take a deep breath. We're ready when you are." As the applause swelled, the father bent down to his son again. "We just sing like we do at home, okay?" he whispered, his words captured faintly by the mic. The boy nodded quickly, though his eyes darted nervously toward the massive audience. The sight of thousands of strangers, cameras, and lights was overwhelming for someone so young. But then, the father crouched and hugged his son briefly before the music even started. That small act of love and protection was broadcast on the big screen, and it made the entire room fall silent. It was no longer just about a performance, it was a glimpse into the purity of a parent-child bond. The hosts, Terry Crews among them, were seen backstage, their faces reflecting the audience's emotion. Terry even muttered, "That's what this show is all about, family, courage, and dreams." When the hug ended, the father stood tall, his hand never letting go of his son's. He nodded toward the music director. The track began faintly, a soft piano introduction filling the theater. Before they even opened their mouths to sing, the audience could sense that something special was about to unfold. The judges leaned in, the crowd hushed, and the stage lights glowed warmly over the father and son duo. In that moment, every struggle the father had endured, the long days under the sun, the calloused hands from construction, the sleepless nights worrying about bills, seemed to vanish. He wasn't just a worker anymore. He was a father on the world's biggest stage, ready to show his son and millions watching across the globe that their voices, their love, and their story mattered. Miguel glanced up at his father once more, his small chest rising and falling with nervous breaths. And Daniel, the father, gave one final reassuring squeeze to his hand. They were ready. The audience leaned in, waiting for the first note. The humble entrance was complete, but what came next would change their lives forever. The soft piano notes lingered in the air, echoing across the grand auditorium. For a moment, the stage was completely still, just a father and his son standing hand in hand in the golden spotlight. Then, Daniel, the father, raised the microphone to his lips. His deep, soulful voice emerged with remarkable steadiness. The first words he sang carried the weight of his life experiences, long days of labor, endless sacrifices, and the quiet strength of a man who had faced hardship but never surrendered hope. His voice wasn't just technically strong, it was human, raw with honesty, and filled with love. The audience leaned forward, every note resonated as though it were a story being told, not just a song being sung. And then, only a few bars later, Miguel's small voice joined in. His tone was pure and crystalline, the kind of innocence that could silence even the most restless crowd. At first, his voice trembled, uncertain of its place in such a grand setting. But as his father looked down at him and offered the gentlest nod, the boy grew braver. His voice steadied, rose, and blended beautifully with his father's. The harmony between them was unlike anything the stage had seen. Daniel's voice carried depth, wisdom, and weight, while Miguel's soared above it, light as air and full of childlike wonder. The two voices didn't compete, they completed each other, weaving a tapestry of sound that seemed to wrap itself around the hearts of everyone listening. Gasps rippled through the audience. A woman in the second row clasped her hands over her mouth. A young couple squeezed each other's arms, whispering, "Oh my God." The cameras cut to the judges. Simon Cowell, usually known for his stern expressions, had already leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand, his eyes narrowing in awe. Heidi Klum smiled softly, visibly enchanted. Sofia Vergara swayed slightly in rhythm with the melody, while Howie Mandel raised his eyebrows, impressed at the unlikely magic unfolding before him. Backstage, Terry Crews was practically bouncing with energy, clapping his hands together and whispering encouragement at the monitors. "Come on, Miguel, you got this, buddy. You got this." As the song built toward its chorus, Daniel and Miguel tightened their grip on each other's hands and sang in unison. The father's strength anchored the melody, while the son's clear tone lifted it to heights that felt almost heavenly. It was more than just music, it was a conversation without words. Daniel's voice seemed to say, "I will always protect you." Miguel's voice answered back, "And I will always believe in you." Together, their harmony carried a message so powerful that even those who didn't understand the lyrics felt the emotion deep in their bones. The audience couldn't contain themselves any longer. They began to rise from their seats, one row at a time, until the entire theater was standing, clapping along in rhythm. The father and son, seeing this outpouring of support, grew even more confident. Miguel's face, once filled with nerves, now glowed with joy. He lifted his chin higher, his voice stronger, every note ringing like a promise fulfilled. The climax arrived. The father and son reached for a final, soaring note together. Daniel's powerful resonance supported Miguel's shining clarity, the two voices blending into a perfect, breathtaking crescendo. It was the kind of moment that felt suspended in time, as though the entire world had stopped just to listen. When the last note finally faded into silence, the theater erupted. Thunderous applause, cheers, whistles, and shouts filled the air. The standing ovation was immediate and overwhelming. People stomped their feet, clapped until their palms hurt, and screamed in delight. Several audience members were openly crying, tissues pressed against their cheeks. The camera panned back to the judges. Heidi was wiping away tears, smiling brightly. Sophia clapped so hard her bracelets jingled. Howie shook his head in disbelief, muttering, "Unbelievable." But the most striking reaction was Simon's. The man who had built a reputation on skepticism and tough criticism sat in stunned silence for a few seconds. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, rare, genuine, and touched with admiration. He turned his gaze toward the boy, then to the father, and finally glanced up at the confetti cannons hanging above the stage as though weighing a decision. Backstage, Terry Crews had both fists raised in victory. "Yes, yes," he shouted, nearly as loud as the crowd. Daniel and Miguel stood frozen in the middle of the stage, breathing heavily, their hands still entwined. The boy's chest heaved as he tried to take it all in, the lights, the cheers, the love radiating from the audience. His father bent down, whispering something in his ear again, and Miguel laughed breathlessly, unable to hide the joy bursting inside him. For a few moments, the noise was so loud that it felt like the roof might lift off the building. Everyone knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary, something that went far beyond a singing audition. And then came the quiet before the storm. The applause began to fade, not because the audience was done, but because they wanted to hear what the judges had to say. The father and son turned toward them expectantly, sweat shining on their foreheads under the heat of the stage lights. Simon leaned back in his chair, still smiling faintly. His eyes twinkled with the kind of decision that could change a life. The room, the performers, the audience, all of it hung on what would happen next. And in that charged silence, it was clear, the performance had done more than stun the judges. It had transformed the atmosphere, turning a television competition into something far more human, far more unforgettable. The stage was ready for the moment that would define their lives forever. The theater was buzzing with energy, the echoes of the standing ovation still swirling through the air. Daniel and Miguel, father and son from Manila, stood center stage, their hands still clasped tightly together. Both were breathless, their hearts pounding from the rush of what they had just done. Miguel's cheeks glowed, his eyes wide with disbelief. Daniel bent down and kissed the top of his son's head, whispering again, words of comfort, of pride, of love. At the judges' table, a silence settled. It wasn't the awkward silence of uncertainty, it was the weighty pause of awe. Everyone waited for someone to speak, and all eyes turned to Simon Cowell. Simon had seen thousands of acts. He had heard powerful singers, dazzling dancers, and performers of every kind. But what he had just witnessed was different. This wasn't about perfection or technique, it was about heart, connection, and something rare, authenticity. He leaned forward, placing his elbows on the desk. His voice was softer than usual, almost reverent. You know, he began, his British accent carrying across the theater, I've done this a long time. And every once in a while, you hear something that you just feel here. He placed a hand over his chest. That wasn't just a song. That was love. That was a father showing the world what it means to stand beside his son. And it was a son proving that no dream is too big. The audience erupted into cheers and applause again, their energy surging like a wave. Simon looked straight at Miguel, who still clung nervously to his father's side. Young man, he said warmly, you have one of the purest voices I've ever heard on this stage. And Daniel, as a father, I can see how much you love your son. Together, you created something magical tonight. Miguel's lips parted slightly in shock. He blinked up at his father, unsure if this was really happening. Daniel, overwhelmed, simply nodded, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. Simon's tone shifted then, less commentary, more decision. He leaned back, glanced up at the glowing golden buzzer button in front of him, and let the silence linger just long enough for the audience to anticipate what was coming. The theater began to stir. The crowd sensed it. Whispers turned into chants. Golden buzzer. Golden buzzer. Golden buzzer. Backstage, Terry Crews was already grinning ear to ear, whispers shouting, do it, Simon. Do it. Simon looked back at the father and son duo one more time. His face softened in a way rarely seen, his voice steady and full of conviction. This, he said, pausing as the crowd held its collective breath, is exactly why we have this button. And with that, Simon raised his hand and slammed the golden buzzer. Instantly, the stage exploded into magic. The iconic golden confetti burst from above, cascading like a shimmering waterfall. The lights flashed in radiant gold, and the music swelled with the triumphant buzzer theme. The audience leapt to their feet again, their cheers so loud they shook the room. Miguel let out a scream of disbelief, his small body trembling as golden flakes landed on his hair, his shoulders, his outstretched arms. Papa, he cried, his voice breaking with joy. We did it, Papa. Daniel dropped to his knees, pulling his son into his arms. They hugged fiercely, both crying openly. The father's shoulders shook as years of hardship, sacrifice, and hope poured out in tears. The son, his cheeks wet, clung to his father with every ounce of his strength, as if afraid to ever let go. The audience was crying with them. In the front row, fans wiped their eyes with tissues, strangers embraced, and even some of the camera operators could be seen blinking rapidly to fight back tears. On stage, Simon stood up, clapping slowly, his face glowing with pride. Heidi was wiping her eyes, whispering, beautiful. Just beautiful. Sophia, radiant and emotional, clapped above her head, while Howie shook his head in wonder, grinning from ear to ear. Backstage, Terry Crews couldn't contain himself any longer. He rushed out onto the stage, his massive frame towering over the father and son as he scooped both of them into a celebratory embrace. This is what dreams are made of. He shouted over the roar of the crowd. This is the golden buzzer moment of the season. Daniel could barely speak. He managed to lift the microphone and, his voice breaking, whispered, thank you. Thank you, Simon, thank you, everyone. This is more than we ever dreamed. This is for my son. This is for our family. This is for every parent who believes in their child. Miguel, overwhelmed, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and shouted into the mic, "I love you, Papa." The words echoed in the theater, amplified by the sound system, and the audience cheered even louder, touched by the raw innocence of it all. Golden confetti continued to rain down as the camera captured wide shots of the entire theater, thousands of people standing, clapping, shouting, crying. The image of Daniel and Miguel kneeling together on the glitter-covered stage, wrapped in an unbreakable embrace, was already iconic. For the millions watching at home, it was more than just a performance. It was a reminder that talent is universal, that love is the strongest bond, and that sometimes, ordinary people can create extraordinary moments. The father-son duo from Manila hadn't just won a place in the competition, they had won the hearts of everyone in the room, and everyone watching around the world. As the final confetti fell and the lights dimmed, Simon leaned over to his fellow judges and said with a smile that cameras still picked up, "That's why I love this show. This is why we do it." And with that, Daniel and Miguel's journey had transformed from a humble dream to a golden reality. A father's promise, a son's courage, and one unforgettable golden buzzer moment that would live forever in America's Got Talent history.